Good afternoon, everybody. Linnell Gardner, Sonny, Liston State. This is the fifth video for the FBI fight file, 1964-1965 Ali Sonny Liston fights. I'm going to read from my book, The Beast, the Deconstruction of Charles Sonny Liston. I'm trying to kind of straighten out the reinterpretation of my book that sports... Showtime Sports kind of lifted a lot of my ideas to make their documentary Pariah, The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston. So I'm trying to read my concepts so it's clear, because they kind of changed my book into a footnote. So, and if you haven't lived it, basically you can't interpret what you cannot live, what you have not lived. So that's why I want to read it and kind of clear up some of my concepts that were used in the Showtime special documentary. You had about four professors that were basically reading my concepts as if they were their own on the documentary. And a lot of the concepts that they used had never been brought up in when it came to interpreting Sonny's life, because that's just how I think. That's how I think through my experiences as a black man. During that special, there were three black professors, and they said that I think three of them or two of them said all black people think alike. And that is pretty much a racist trope to say something like that. So that's when I knew that they didn't write the words that were coming out of their mouth. They were either scripted, coached to focus on certain areas of history, or they just totally lifted my concepts from this book. And it was scripted. I mean, a documentary is not usually scripted, not unless it's a docudrama. And this was billing itself as a documentary, not a docudrama. So there was no reason why they were trying to be, there was no reason why they should not have called their show a docudrama, because even some of the characters that they were playing, some of the people that were being interviewed, were actors or out-of-work police officers who had become actors. So I just want to clear up some of my concepts that were used, so it's a little bit more. So there's a little bit more clarity of what I was trying to, kind of like what I was trying to say in my book. So we're going to go back to the fight file, which again, the fight file that I requested from the DOJ and the FBI, basically showed that there's nothing in the fight file but their need to surveil and go after the Nation of Islam, because again, the fights they knew the fights were not fixed, so their main concern was the Nation of Islam. So I'm going to continue from my last video, kind of like what the fight meant socially and what the fight meant politically. Okay. So, war of words. And I quote, "I'm going to kill him, put him into shock." End quote. If my grandmother was correct in saying that Sonny and Muhammad Ali were best friends prior to the first Cassius Clay-Sonny Liston fights, then the above statement that Muhammad Ali made before his first fight had nothing to do with Sonny. Was she right in saying that the public showing of their mutual animosity toward one another was only pre-fight propaganda? Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston seemed to find joy and pleasure in the way they capped on one another before the fight. you can see not only Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay enjoying themselves, but also their handlers seem to be in on the fun. But let us not forget that Muhammad Ali was no longer representing himself as a boxer. Muhammad Ali was the ultimate contradiction. A financially successful and immensely popular black man who was still living in a country that judged him for the color of his skin and not the content of his character. Muhammad Ali, as well as Sonny Liston, both grew up in the Jim Crow South and knew firsthand the injustices perpetrated against their people. Muhammad Ali was also being coached by the Nation of Islam and was spreading their ideology on the world stage. So when he said, "I'm going to kill him," put him into shock. Could he have been talking about the image of black inferiority? Was Mr. Ali stating that he was trying not to kill Sonny, but to kill the stereotypical image that the world had grown accustomed to believing was in every black man? If this is true, then that would mean that there was some sort of conspiracy that went above and beyond the control of the boxers, managers, and fight promoters. A conspiracy that may have reached to the highest levels of our government. But who would be involved in that? But who would be involved in that and why? It is well documented that not only President Kennedy, but also his administration wanted Floyd Patterson to beat Sonny Liston in his title defense along with the NAACP. And if it were humanly possible, the Kennedy administration and the NAACP wanted Floyd Patterson to avoid fighting Sonny Liston altogether. And I will quote, "A grand debate on the morality of letting Liston vie for the championship erupted in the media. Sports writers emphasized his criminal background as much as his brutal reputation in the ring." The New York Herald Tribune columnist Red Smith asked, simply, should a man with a record of violent crime be given a chance to become a champion of the world? Many felt boxing's reputation was on the line. Others worried about the reputation of Black America. NAACP President Percy Sutton said that erudite, soft-spoken Floyd Patterson represents us better than Liston ever could or would. Years later, in the book, In This Corner, 42 world champions tell their stories. Patterson described the terrible pressure he was under when the civil rights leaders, including President Kennedy himself, made it clear to Patterson that they needed him to win, as if a loss would doom the civil rights movement itself. At the time of growing unrest, Liston was cast in the public imagination as the angry, dangerous black man. Even the NAACP had asked good guy Floyd Patterson not to fight him. I think that this worry over the Patterson-Liston fight by the Kennedy administration and the NAACP was just a cover for what the government and the power behind the government were really trying to do. Let's not get it twisted. Sonny Liston and Floyd Patterson had a lot more in common than they would have had you believe. As a result of his own self-perception, I'm quoting, this is a quote. As a result of his own self-perception, Patterson did not go to school, but avoided the truant officer by staying in the dark all day, in neighborhood cellars, alleys, subway stations, or in the movies. Patterson was not like the other kids. He could not or would not read or write. He did not bring friends home, and he would not look people in the eye. Besides skipping school, he began to steal to pass the time away. Because his mother could not control him, Patterson was sent to the Wiltwyck School for Boys in 1945, which was an alternative to jail for boys aged 8 to 12. It was at this correctional institution that Patterson blossomed. At Wiltwyck, he received individual attention and found that white and black kids were treated exactly the same. Liston and Patterson both spent their lives helping troubled youth. Sonny attained legal guardianship of Daniel Liston. Mr. Patterson adopted Tracy Harris Patterson. I must again add that politics is about shared interests and not about political parties. Remember that during the Punic Wars, there were Africans who fought with the Phoenicians, and there were Africans who fought on the side of their enemies, the Romans. The NAACP and the Kennedy administration had a common agenda, and that had nothing to do with the interests of Sonny Liston or Floyd Patterson. It is important to note that there were many factions of the Black freedom movement, and they sometimes agreed, but often disagreed with one another. Unfortunately for both Liston and Patterson, they would be swept up into the politics of the day, and the picture that politics had painted for them was of two fighters, one good and one bad. Floyd Patterson would be the prototype, and Sonny Liston would be his antithesis. And those few in politics who wanted to control the many will force us, not only as a nation, but also as Black people, to make a choice between Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston to be our hero. Like Pontius Pilate, who told the crowd to choose between releasing Barabbas or Jesus. The Kennedy administration and the NAACP asked the crowd that same question, and the crowd demanded the release of Floyd Patterson and said of Sonny Liston, crucify him. Floyd Patterson had become the chosen one, and his past was glossed over in order to serve for the greater good. The question we must ask ourselves is the American dream worth the price of admission? In no way do I think that Mr. Patterson was involved in any cover-up or was aware that he would be used in this way. But when it comes to politics, usually someone must be made to play the scapegoat. I believe that the CIA and FBI act as a government behind the government. It was known that J. Edgar Hoover and the American government feared an American version of the Bolshevik Revolution. J. Edgar Hoover knew that he had to keep his eye on the American poor because they, in his opinion, had a historical tendency to be subversive. The Nazis had the Jewish question, and since 1913, the FBI had the Negro question. The government and the powers that be were doing what they did best, and that was to divide up the national freedom movements of the Negro people. Not unlike the way they divided up the different tribes during the time of slavery, and then later used their fair-skinned Anglo features of the house Negro to create tension and jealousy between the darker-skinned, more Negroid-looking field Negroes. The slaves' preoccupation with their skin color, for instance, who was Black and who wasn't Black enough, or who was favored by the master and who was not favored by the master, made them unable at times to focus on their common enemy. This jealousy, mistrust, and tension is still practiced today amongst our Black politicians, hip-hop artists, and the African-American people, continually forcing us to create divisions amongst ourselves. I am statistically more likely to be killed at the hands of a Black man than I am from a member of the Ku Klux Klan. This is seen in the statement by the then NAACP President Percy Sutton, who described Floyd Patterson as more erudite, a person that best represents Black America. And Sonny, who was seen as brutal in the ring, had a record of violent crime, lacked morals, and was cast in the public imagination as a dangerous Black man. We have to remember that the Civil Rights Act was not passed until 1964, and that America had a long and successful history of creating the myths of heroes and anti-heroes, and the belief in the power of good over evil. Using the silent era of cinema as an example, especially the genre of the American Western, how did the audience react when the good guy came on the screen? They cheered him. They cheered for him. And how were they able to identify who was the good guy and who was the bad guy? The bad guy always wore a black cowboy hat, and the good guy always wore a white cowboy hat. Therefore, once we had determined who was good and who was bad, then we as the audience were ready for the narrator to begin our morality play. We now had our anti-hero and our hero. We were told through the telling of the story who would represent good and who would represent evil, all based on who wore which hat. In every myth, there needs to be a devil. The devil becomes the tempter of both good and evil, forcing our anti-hero and our hero to make a choice. We cheer for good because of our beliefs, the belief that good triumphs over evil. That is what religion has taught us to believe. We learned about this in Sunday school. But when we go to another silent Western with a different title, and we find out that those same two actors that we saw in the last film are playing the leads in the new Western, except that the actor who played the good guy in the last Western is now wearing the black cowboy hat, and the actor who was playing the bad guy in the last Western is now wearing the white hat. Through this process, we realize over time that not only are the cowboy hats interchangeable, but so is the telling of the story. This sounds familiar, right? You heard this in Pariah, The Lives and Deaths of Sonny Liston. Well, this is where they got it from. And also, I got it from Sonny. Sonny's quote. He originated the quote of the cowboy hat, black cowboy hat, and white cowboy hat, because he said in so many words. He said, in boxing, you got to have. It's like cowboys. You need your bad guy and your good guy. So that I got that from Sonny's quote. So when Jack Johnson fought Jim Jeffries for the heavyweight championship of the world, the crowd cheered for Jim Jeffries and booed Jack Johnson. And I quote, Thus it was that millions of whites convinced themselves that their honor, their virtue, and their sense of reality depended on the outcome of the struggle that matched Johnson and Jeffries, who was said to be invincible. Thus, it was that the Johnson-Jeffries fight was invested with a cosmic significance. This was no simple clash of two men. It was a clash of elemental forces. It was Captain Ahab and the White Whale, Bigger and Mary, Hemingway and the White Snow of Kilimanjaro, Rudyard Kipling and the lesser breeds also outside the law. White hatred intensified with Johnson's love for white women and his pummeling of white boxers. Jack Johnson just happened to be the first black man to ever wear the heavyweight championship belt. Jim Jeffries was white and at the time was seen as a great white hope. The man designated to get that belt back to the place where it belonged, in the hands of the white race. And I quote, the term the Great White Hope reflects the racism and segregation of the era in which Johnson fought. It could be argued that Johnson, the first African American to hold the World Heavyweight Championship belt, was the best fighter of his generation. Yet, white reaction against Johnson's win and his very public relationship with white women was so strong that in 1912, the United States Congress, concerned that scenes of Johnson pummeling white boxers would cause race riots, passed a law making it illegal to transport prize fight films across state lines. The Great White Hope referred to the white boxer whom whites hoped would finally defeat Johnson. If we use the metaphor of the cowboy western for this particular fight, then Jim Jeffries had the white hat on and Jack Johnson had the black hat on. But in the championship fight between Max Schmeling, a German, and Joe Louis, the brown bomber, this is where Showtime Sports picked up my idea right here. So Max Schmeling, a German, and Joe Louis, the brown bomber, the crowd was cheering for Joe Louis, who was a Negro, and booing for the Aryan Max Schmeling. Did this hero worship switch have something to do with the fact that we were about to fight tyranny by going to war with Germany? In the telling of this story, Matt Smelling had the black hat and Joe Louis had the white hat on. And I quote, Marciano was, to be sure, a devastating boxer who could flatten some of the toughest pugs the sport has ever produced. That he beat Ezzard Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott, two fearsome black fighters, imbued Marciano with a great white hope status that has plagued white fighters since back when Black Jack Johnson was laying the smackdown in the ring, end quote. Now we come to the Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay fights. Sonny was being cheered and Cassius Clay was being booed. Why? In this morality tale was Clay wearing, why? In this morality tale was Clay wearing the black hat and Sonny wearing the white hat. Let me say that one more time. Okay. Why, in this morality tale, was Clay wearing the black hat and Sonny wearing the white hat? Why was Sonny suddenly the hero and Ali the villain? Let's not forget that Sonny was seen as a champion that nobody wanted. Why is that? No title fight can happen without express consent of the government. Sports, when it reaches the world stage, is all about governments displaying their power and their political ideology. The best example I can think of is Adolf Hitler's attempt to show the world the power of the Aryan nation during the Munich Olympics, and how he used the Olympic Games to promote his anti-Judea Bolshevik agenda. And I quote, politics has always been a part of the boxing world, as Patrick Myler explains in his book Ring of Hate. The Americans have forever been weary of letting a foreigner take control of the World Heavyweight Championship. The belt was a form of national pride, a political tool, the politics of fighting for the championship. Depending on which political party was in charge, determined the political maneuvering a boxer had to make to get a title fight, oiling the squeaky wheel. Some support for Smelling was guaranteed from an unexpected source. Those Americans who would rather see a white man, any white man, win the World Heavyweight Championship than a black man. Although Smelling considered the United States his second home, he was still German, a representative of Hitler. Adolf Hitler's suppression of democracy and his anti-Semitic campaign overthrew the Weimar Republic. He imposed his personal dictatorship, broke up labor unions, abolished freedom of speech, sifted the independence of the courts, drove Jews out of the public and professional life, and started a vast rearmament program in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. The first concentration camp had been set up in Dachau. Smelling would have to work doubly hard to prove his right to a title shot. As for his standing in Germany, he might find himself less of a hero with the Nazis if he continued to have an American Jew as a manager. Compared to these problems, fighting in the ring was easy, end quote. So what would have been the American government's political agenda behind the Sonny Liston and Muhammad Ali fights? Why was it necessary for the government to bring these two fighters together? Class cultural exhibition. The government brought these two men together because they needed to know if the American people were ready to accept change. You see, in this morality play, there would be no need to fight against the evils of fascism, no need for a great white hope. As I said before, the reason for nations to bring fighters together and the reason for sporting events is not only for nations to display their power, but for them to extol their political ideology. The government's show of power this time was not to show its power over other nations, but to show its power and its ideology over its own people. And I quote, get people to believe in an idea, a moral issue, and then, after doing that, turn that moral issue into a political one. Senator Henry Morrill, end quote. America's outrage over the 1964 and 1965 championship fights between Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston were very telling. It showed the government that the American people were not yet ready for change. It also showed them that the belief in white supremacy and black inferiority inferiority was still alive and well in America. And I quote, Shame is considered one aspect of socialization in all societies. According to the anthropologist Ruth Benedict, cultures may be classified by their emphasis on the use of either shame or guilt to regulate the social activities of individuals. Shared opinions, expected behaviors, and potential associated feelings of shame are in any case proven to be effective in guiding behavior of a group or society. When white Negrophobes in the 1960s heard Muhammad Ali and the Negro race talking about how black and beautiful they all were, Negrophobes thought that black people were being delusional. When the world renamed Muhammad Ali's overhand right the Phantom Punch, instead of calling it the Anchor Punch, as Muhammad Ali had professed, Mr. Ali's masterful accomplishments were reduced to cheap parlor tricks. In fact, those accomplishments, along with Mr. Ali and his Black freedom movement, had ceased to exist in the minds of those Americans who had seen racist ideology go unchallenged for hundreds of years. In the eyes of white people who had an allergic reaction to the existence of black people, there was no such thing as black power or black beauty. Any attempt by the Black Power movement of the 60s to change the worldview was futile because those Negrophobes in white America were already previously occupied by the idea of white supremacy. And I quote, racism made them incapable of any fair or correct evaluation of another person. Racial prejudice had built a wall in front of their eyes. And that wall would come up every time Muhammad Ali would move in the ring, every time he floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee, every time he bobbed and weaved, every time he rope-a-doped, every time he stated that he was too pretty, every time he shuffled and danced, every time he spoke of being the greatest and the king of the world. And right before Muhammad Ali threw his anchor punch, that wall would come up one last time, as the idea of white supremacy began to cast a shadow over the entire arena. And the darkness would remind white racists of a story that was told to them when they were kids. A story about a phantom whose mask displayed no pupils and made him look inhuman. A story that captivated them as children and frightened them at the same time. And I quote, The Phantom is an American adventure comic strip created by Lee Falk, also creator of Mandrake the Magician, a popular feature adapted into many media, including television, film, and video games. It stars a costumed crime fighter operating from the fictional African country of Bangala. End quote. While caught up in the nostalgia of the moment, those fans who were racist lost track of time. And the only thing that would bring them back to the reality of the moment was the cracking sound of the anchor punch. And Muhammad Ali's voice screaming down at Sonny Liston saying, "Get up, bum." But no one had seen the punch because the wall of racism had blocked their vision. The racist world had looked away for only a brief moment, and when they looked back, they could not believe how Sonny Liston, who represented for them everything racist ideology had taught them to believe was true about the Negro race, could be on the ground. Knocked out by the idea of black power and black beauty. For white racists, Sonny Liston had to win. He had to win because the Southern way of life was dependent upon it. White racist mentality was dependent upon the belief that white purity existed and Negro purity did not. As the racist fans placed their bets before the fight, they placed their bets not on both fighters' ability to win, but they placed their bets solely on their faith that white racist ideology could defeat the ideology of black nationalism. And this is how Sonny Liston became the odds-on favorite to defeat Cassius Clay. Sonny Liston had become an unlikely hero who had to defeat Muhammad Ali, this carpetbagger, from changing the South and everything that the South stood for, and also what white superiority stood for. For beauty to exist alongside ugliness and evil to exist alongside goodness would mean that Sonny Liston and Muhammad Ali were one and the same. It would also mean that Sonny Liston and the Negro people struggled with good and evil within themselves. It would ultimately lead the world to conclude that people, white and black, were equal. Sonny Liston had to defeat Muhammad Ali so that white racists could continue to hide the shame of their past, so that they could continue to believe that there was a phantom behind Ali's anchor punch, so that they could continue to believe that evil existed not within the white race, but outside of it. Racist America needed Sonny Liston to win because they were still afraid of facing their own shadow. And I quote, "If you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Such a man has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself, as he is now unable to say that they do this or that, they are wrong, and they must be fought against. He lives in the house of the gathering. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself, and if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic, unsolved social problems of our day." Carl Jung. End quote. And so, this is the reason why racists placed the white cowboy hat on Sonny Liston and the black cowboy hat on Muhammad Ali when they fought in 1964 and 1965. This is also the reason why they booed Muhammad Ali, the winner of the gold medal in the Olympic Games, the people's champion, when he entered the arena, and why they supported Sonny Liston, the champion that nobody wanted, when he entered the arena. Even though the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were passed in 1964 and 1965, the nation would never be able to live up to the meaning of its creed as long as racism existed side by side with freedom. America would continue to be a nation divided, and the American dream would be just that, a dream. Two minds in one person, duality of consciousness. The two streams of consciousness alternate in controlling overt behavior, sometimes waging a battle for control that has far-reaching implications, end quote. Thank you for listening. Please click the like button if you like what you heard, and check out my book, Beast, The Deconstruction of Charles Sonny Liston, on Amazon. And thank you very much. See you next time.